Today, we bring you our very first 2025 rookie mock draft of the offseason. We talk all about the upcoming draft's most interesting prospects, along with some other guys to keep an eye on. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dynasty Construction Podcast. Justin, joined as always by David and JP. Today, we get to have some fun here. We're going to talk 2025 rookies with a mock draft for you guys. And this is where we would draft these guys if we had to draft today with everything we know. So, with that all being said, little housekeeping, superflex. So that explains what we're drafting the quarterbacks. We're going with 1.75 tight end premium so that you guys know kind of a little context on where we're taking the tight ends. Spoilers, it's earlier than we would if there was no tight end premium. Really groundbreaking stuff here. Before we hop right in, I haven't seen you guys since before Christmas. How'd you guys do in the playoffs?
No comment. Just horrible, horrible luck. Unbelievably bad luck.
Yeah, it was pretty rare how bad your luck was, honestly. I had one playoff team. I don't have as many dynasty teams as you guys. Had a lot of rebuilders too. One I actually missed, but I finished third in our league we're in together, so I wasn't too upset about that. But I lost to David by 0.3 points in the semifinal.
That was
So
like
that's
the only bit of good luck that I had.
but
So I'm glad it happened.
yeah, that 0.3, the Anthony Richardson touchdown got called back and screwed me. But it is what it is.
I
Nobody
was
cares. Nobody
five
cares.
championships in 13 dynasty leagues. I feel like that's a pretty good ratio, but that's just me. Anyways, hopping right into our mock draft here. I'm the dumb one in the group, so you guys let me go 101, gave me the easy pick. Really appreciate that, guys. No brainer here. Going Ashton Genty, running back, Boise State. 2,601 rushing yards for this 5'9", 215-pound absolute monster of a human. Has a good receiving profile in his career. Only 23 receptions this year, but 43 the year before. First in pretty much every stat for RBs this year. That fun stat about more yards after contact than anybody else had before, or including, all yards, etc. So just no brainer at this point. I think if you don't need running back, can understand going a different direction, perhaps. But I think in that situation, best move is to try to liquidate the draft pick with everything we know right now.
Yeah, I mean he's super compact, some of the best contact balance that you've ever seen. I mean 5'9", he's got just great leverage. And I've seen bodybuilders saying they're doing, oh, I'm gonna try Ashton Jetty's workout because supposedly he's a freak in the gym. So yeah, he is incredible, and would be happy to have him at 101. But I got the 102, and I'm gonna go with Tet McMillan. Not upset about this at all. This guy is just super long. He's 6'5", 212 pounds. He's an early declare and he's been great in college. Since his freshman year, he had 700 yards, 8 touchdowns as a freshman, which that is really good. Since then, in the last 2 seasons as a sophomore and junior, he's had 2,721 yards and 18 touchdowns over those 2 seasons. In contested catch situations, not only is he big, but he's got great ball skills and he makes these one-handed catches. He's just got incredibly strong hands that you can rely on. Noah Fafita's quarterback didn't play nearly as well this year, and he was making all kinds of contorting catches that are really nice to see if he does not have a great accurate quarterback. Obviously, he's a great threat in the red zone, down the field, chain mover, got a lot of first downs. He had over 60 as a sophomore. He had 55 this past season. So he's great all over the field. And he's got pretty good lateral agility as well for a big guy to separate and make defenders miss. Reminds me a little bit of like Drake London. He's kind of a guy who's a little underrated with his yak ability. And I mean, he's not just like Mike Evans, where Mike Evans doesn't give a lot of yak. Hall of Fame player, amazing player, but Tet actually, I think, is a better yak threat than a guy like Mike Evans, actually.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me with Ted is how he moves at that size, like you're saying, JP. He's good at yak. He's good at making people miss. He's just pretty much good at everything. Pretty much the consensus wide receiver one here. I do think if Hunter decides to play wide receiver strictly, there's a conversation, but at this point, definitely love that pick. This part of the draft is not where I would like to be. If I have the 103, at least until we get more knowledge, I would love to move out of this pick. I think if Hunter is a wide receiver, he'd probably be my pick here. Instead, I'm going to take his teammate reluctantly. Look, it's not a great quarterback class. I don't love Sanders as a prospect, but it does seem like he will likely be the top quarterback taken, at least a top 5 pick. If not, Cam Ward might go first. He's not an awful prospect. He's had some pretty productive seasons. He had 37 touchdowns this year to 10 interceptions, over 4,000 passing yards, highest adjusted completion percentage according to PFF. Only 1.2% turnover worthy plays, one of the best in the nation. So there's definitely some stuff to like there. There's a lot not to like though too. Took a lot of sacks, tried to play a lot of hero ball. Doesn't necessarily have the arm talent that some of the elite passers do. Doesn't add much for rushing. So I don't love this pick. I'd like to trade it if I can, but hopefully we find some more conviction once we get a little further in this process. But for now, if we were drafting today, I would take the safety of someone I believe to be a top 5 quarterback, just because look at superflex, he's going to have an opportunity. So I don't love this pick, but I think it's the safest pick here.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable expectation that QB1 in the draft class very likely will be going at the 103, making you plant a flag at this point. Can't blame you for going with the projected QB1. Understand the logic there, but would love to trade the pick as well if I were you. Definitely don't feel like it's going to end up being as valuable as 103 last year was. Now at the 104, I'm going to take Omarion Hampton, running back out of UNC. In any other class, this guy would be getting so much more buzz. He'd be RB1 in some of the classes we have seen in recent years because he is a true workhorse with the he has the true workhorse upside. Fantastic in college. That kind of build we like to see, 6 foot, 220 pounds, kind of compact, not too tall. We never like those 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", because they're more likely to be upright runners. So that fun size we like to see. Over 1,500 yards, 16 total touchdowns as a sophomore playing alongside Drake May this past season. As a junior with Drake May gone, over 2,000 scrimmage yards, 17 total touchdowns, 38 receptions. He was the offense for this team. More importantly, showing that ability to get that work in the receiving game that we absolutely love that can break fantasy football for a running back. So without knowing more about the other positional players, we don't really have that clarity, in my opinion, for how the other guys are going to get drafted at this point. So I think this is the safe pick at this point in the direction I'm looking to go.
Yeah, and I think if he gets first round draft capital and gets a good landing spot, I think he could be the consensus 103, somebody that we're really excited about. I think he's great. I mean, what he can do on the ground combined with, like you said, that receiving ability is really impressive. I think he could be potentially a workhorse like we don't see often in the NFL. At 105, I went with the other quarterback that is talked about in the top of the first round conversation, and that is Cam Ward. He's got decent size at 6'2", 223 pounds. Not huge, but he's got adequate size. He's a fifth-year guy, but he's only going to be 22 years old on draft day, which that's kind of surprising for a fifth-year guy. He is PFF's highest graded quarterback by offensive grade. Very, very impressive year this year. I mean, he was fourth in Heisman voting. Thought he should have been probably third, but 4,313 passing yards and 39 passing touchdowns. And this guy, he has the ability to extend plays. He's very creative. He works well within the pocket. He's not really a runner, but he's a scrambling type, kind of like what you see from guys like Joe Burrow, where they're making guys miss within the pocket, delivering balls with some of the sidearm angles, things that you see. He's an impressive guy, and I think he could be QB1 in this class. So at 105, I'm pretty content with him here.
Yeah, I think Cam Ward definitely could become the QB1 in this class. He has a pretty good shot of doing that. I just when I took Shador, I felt a little safer with what I've heard so far about his projected draft capital. I do think they'll be QB1 and 2 most likely. They could end up as the only first round quarterbacks, and it might be one of those classes where it's these two guys and then no one. And sadly, neither of these guys are projecting to be elite, probably. So if you need quarterback, not the best year for that, but you probably already know that. Moving on to my pick at 106, I'm going to take the next receiver off the board. This guy was my pick for wide receiver one going into the class, had a pretty rough year, but had a great sophomore campaign. This is Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri. Now, he's not completely blameless for his rough year this year, but the entire Missouri offense took a big step back. He still had the same dominator rating this year as he did last year. So that means he was accounting for basically the same percentage of yards and touchdowns. Had over 3.5 yards per out run versus man still this season, which is pretty good. Only around two, I believe it was just over 2 yards per out run against zone. Like to get that number up, but still shows some elite signs. I believe he'll have first round draft capital. I think he probably projects better as like a 1B. Maybe he can be the alpha in an offense, but either way, he's got some elite talent. He's great with the ball in his hands. Should be a lot of fun if he can get into the right offense. So I'm pretty high on him. I think he'll be a lot of fun, even if he's not a tier one guy. I think he has an outside shot at that. In this class, I'm pretty happy with him at 106.
Yeah, this is a guy that going into this year, we were expecting to be taken 102, 103 type of range. So, assuming he gets the draft capital, which it seems like he will from everything we hear, assuming we don't absolutely hate the landing spot, I think it is pretty good value at this point. And now I feel like the question marks kind of begin. For me at the 107, I'm going to take Travis Hunter, the Heisman winner, wide receiver slash cornerback. Not sure what he's going to play at this point. So I'm making this choice here with the risk, not with any sort of caveat on if he's playing wide receiver. If we were making that caveat, like David said, he might have been going at 103 for us. So this guy right here, 96 receptions, 1,258 yards, 15 touchdowns receiving, elite 5-star recruit, number one player out of high school. Again, like we said, not sure what's happening with him. Could be pretty much useless for us if we're not in an IDP league and he does play just cornerback. But I went back and kind of just like referenced a interesting Dynasty Nerds episode on the kind of like hit rates of every draft pick over the last like 5 seasons or so. And they had the hit rate of the draft picks between 105 to 108 as about 50%, a little bit lower than 50% on providing either a solid hit or like a player that you can put into your lineup. So either like a stud or a player that you can consistently put in your lineup. So given the fact that like in this range, if I can't trade it, I feel like if he plays wide receiver, he's a hit. If he doesn't, he's probably not. So given the fact that it's already a 50% chance, I'll take it on this guy that I know that if he hits, he has that ceiling with his athleticism. So to me, I think at the 107, risky, of course, but I think it's kind of for me, a little bit of a no-brainer risk to take.
Definitely risky. I will say if he does play something like 50% of snaps at wide receiver, I'm probably not going to be that excited because even if he has really, really high yards per route run, if you're playing half the snaps, it's going to be hard to have enough of an impact in fantasy football. But if he does play 50% of snaps, he has the name value that you probably couldn't move him if he does have some sort of big week. Because if he is really doing that, I'm probably going to look to move him. And I think with the name value, you probably can. But I'm interested to see what happens there for sure. At the 108, I took running back Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. This is, I mean, this class is great size overall at running back. You'll notice the trend there. But Caleb Johnson, he's 6 foot, 225 pounds. This year, he had a breakout year as a junior. He had 1,537 rush yards at a really good 6.4 yards per carry and 21 rushing touchdowns. He had a 22 receptions. That's the biggest difference between Omer Hampton and Caleb Johnson for me is that I think Hampton is a much better receiver. I think Johnson's fine there, but Hampton he does really well as a receiver. Caleb Johnson could continue to develop there, But I think he is a really, really good runner. He's really strong. He dishes out contact like it's personal, like he's been talking to his girl or something. He, I mean, I've seen some plays on the goal line. He's not going to get denied very frequently there. And he brings pretty good burst, lateral agility, and long speed. He creates these angles on linebackers where they think that they can catch him, and he surprises them with his speed. And he's had some big plays, so I really like this player a lot. I will say he's got one of the nastiest stiff arms I've ever seen in college too. I think that's going to translate for sure with how strong he is. But I really like him, and I think he could rise to be a 105, maybe even 104 if he gets first round capital with a good landing spot. It's going to be tough for him to pass Hampton because of the receiving ability, but I don't think it's impossible necessarily.
Yeah, I do think RB2 is possible for him. I think RB5 is possible for him. It's kind of nice that it's such a deep class. I know the combine isn't everything, but for running backs, it's something. You can survive a bad combine. Look at Bucky Irving. You can survive bad draft capital. Look at Bucky Irving. But Caleb Johnson projects to be maybe in a tier with Amari and Hampton, and they might be in a tier of their own. It could definitely change, but I think that's probably how we currently have it. That's how I currently have it. Definitely a good pick there. I am going to take my first Buckeye here in the first round, Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver 3 for me in this class. He is an all-time leader in several career wide receiver stats. I believe he just took over the yardage. It might have been reception, but I think it was the yardage record last week. Had an elite sophomore season next to Marvin Harrison Jr. Very similar statistically. Last year, kind of got injured, had his season mostly derailed from that. Tried to play through it a little bit, but didn't produce what you would hope. This season, pretty good. Not elite statistically, but pretty good. Ohio State ran the ball a lot more this year, and also the superhuman freak Jeremiah Smith became the best player on campus as soon as he stepped foot on campus. Well, not exactly, but he had to prove it, and he did prove it. So while normally you think a senior wide receiver playing second fiddle to a true freshman is not a good thing, if you have seen Jeremiah Smith play at all, you know that this is an exception to that. Jeremiah Smith would probably be the first pick in the NFL draft this year. That's how good he is. But this is not a moment for me to talk about Jeremiah so much as it is a Mecca. He's a great leader. He's great with the ball in his hands. I've seen Amon Ra comps. I think that's definitely the high end for him. I don't quite expect it, but that type of player. Landing spot's pretty important for him. You want a quarterback that'll be on the same page with him. So you want a good quarterback, want an offensive coordinator who's going to put him in the right position. Similar to Burton, I think he's probably better as a 1B, but definitely someone I expect to be a weekly starter in your lineups for several years to come.
I've been watching a little bit of him in the playoffs so far, and I gotta say he passes the eye test for me as far as a guy that I think can play in the NFL for sure. Gotta admit, doesn't seem to be just a homer pick, although I'm sure it's at least partially. Now I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna take the best pass catcher coming out of the Big Ten with my next pick, Tyler Warren, tight end at Penn State, 6'6", 260 pounds, finished seventh in the Heisman race, 98 receptions, 1,158 yards, 8 touchdowns, 197 rush yards for 4 more touchdowns. Only one of 2 tight ends with over 1,000 yards, second highest PFF receiving grade for tight ends. Can kind of do it all. In a couple of our previous videos have kind of made that comp to, Bowers-esque. Not saying we think he's going to be Bowers, but just that guy that the offense gets the ball to, but he can also get the ball as a traditional receiver, but also you scheme for him because he's just so good. And just a guy that we're going to be really excited, especially if he winds up in a good offensive situation, one of those fun young coaches. Obviously, people always say Shanahan, McVay, wherever Ben Johnson ends up going, would love to see him go there as well, unless it's Chicago, because that's a lot of mouth to feeds. But you catch my drift. Really excited about this guy, what he can do, especially in a tight end premium league. It's not impossible to see him with a good landing spot and a good rookie season, being tight end 3, you know, this time next year. Not saying I'm predicting that. If I was predicting he's going to be tight end 3 this time next year, I would have taken him earlier than this, but there's just a path with his ability and his age and the pedigree that he has, etc. And that upside here is a slam dunk for me.
Yeah, I absolutely love him as a prospect. I think we all do. I think the biggest difference is just Brock Bowers. He was rare unicorn guy who could take a slant to the house. That's pretty rare for a tight end, but not to take away from what Warren can do. I mean, I think an offensive minded head coach is going to love what they can use him, and they can use him everywhere as like a chess piece, pretty much. So yeah, I think he's probably a first round pick as well, and that's great for confidence in this player. And at the 111, I went with running back out of Ohio State. Which one is it? Travion Henderson. That is the guy that I really, really like. He's kind of becoming a guy I'm really falling in love with. I mean, he's 5'10, 208 pounds. Coming into college, he came in as a highly regarded five-star running back, and he immediately showed why. I mean, as a freshman, he had 1,248 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns, and 27 receptions for 312 yards. And unfortunately, following that, he struggled with injury. But this season, it's his senior year, so he's not an early declare. But this year, playing alongside Judkins, it is a split backfield. But for what it's worth, I mean, his yards per carry is 7.3. That's just amazing. Really, really good. And you see that he's a really efficient back on a down to down basis, which also has big playability. I just think that the intangibles are fantastic. I think his burst when I watch very impressive. He's got great lateral ability and his receiving ability. I mean, they line him out wide, and he makes some impressive catches. That he runs wheel routes, catching the ball downfield. And also, what I love about him, which this isn't as much fantasy football stuff, but I think it's great for the NFL, is that he's a really good pass protector. I've heard scouts rave about how good he is in pass protection. David, I've heard him talk about as well. And also, he does not fumble. He has 0 fumbles over the last 2 seasons. So I think that NFL teams are going to love this guy. I also hear that he's a great leader as well, just a great guy overall, and has had to overcome a lot of adversity through college. And I think that he has a good shot to be a top 40 pick in the NFL, but I think he's probably going to be round two. I don't really see him falling past round two with what he can do with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, he's making a lot of money for himself in this playoff run. He's having an excellent playoff run. Might be separating from the rest of the packet running back here even. He is a great leader. I've seen him pick up blitzing linebackers and just stone cold stop them. Guys that are probably have him by 25 to 40 pounds. So definitely what you want in your receiving speed back. I think you'll probably need someone to take some of the early down work between the tackles from him so he can stay healthy. But, that was Jameer Gibbs all season, and I wouldn't be surprised if he finished as RB1 overall. I haven't looked, but in today's NFL, that's not a bad thing. So definitely love Henderson there. I'm going to just go ahead and take the other guy in that backfield, Quinshon Judkins. I'm kind of at the point where I'm just going to let the NFL tell me who to take here. Not strictly draft capital dependent, but also landing spot I think is important. Judkins had a breakout as a true freshman in the SEC that was excellent. Next 2 seasons, not quite as good, but still pretty darn good. This season, obviously splitting time with Travion, probably his worst statistical season on paper, but he can still eclipse 1,000 yards depending on how the rest of the playoff goes. I know you're going to say, well, that's more games because he's playing in the playoff. It is, but it's less carries, so still impressive. He's 6 foot 220, not a great receiver, but not awful. Probably not quite as good of a blocker as Henderson, but still pretty good as at that as well. I do think he has a chance to be in today's version of a bell cow. So not, what we would think of back in the early 2000s necessarily, but a guy who only comes off the field when he needs a break kind of guy. Probably more likely that he has someone like Henderson to pair with him in the NFL. But another guy that we project to be a pretty high end starter for many years. So at the end of the first, I got to be thrilled with getting Judkins.
Yeah, as much as I want to make fun of you again for having some homer picks with your Buckeyes, I absolutely love this guy as well. Love his young breakout age in the SECs. Never played against bad competition, between the SEC and the Big Ten. Very efficient this year. Obviously, a lot less touches, but I like the talent, so I don't mind less tread on the tire. To be honest with you, having less carries just makes you feel better about his longevity. I can't make the same joke this time about my next pick because I don't think that this is the best running back in the Big Ten, but definitely a top five running back in the Big Ten. I feel pretty comfortable about that statement. I'm going to go with running back Nick Singleton out of Penn State. Again, we see that same type of build, right? 6 foot, 227 pounds. He's an early declare. Had a down sophomore year last year, but back up this year over 1,000 yards, averaging 6.5 yards per carry while splitting the backfield with another great college RB here. Has made some strides as a receiver, 39 receptions, 342 yards, 5 touchdowns this season. Can't really make a statement about his ability to be a bell cow back just because we haven't had to see it with him splitting it, but he's got the size for it. A lot of these guys do in this draft class. Back to back seasons with 300 receiving yards and over 1.5 yards per route run. So, has shown that he has the ability to get that receiving work. And then, there's just that Penn State factor of these guys seem to just kill it at the combine. So it's not impossible for Singleton to rise up a little bit more with the pedigree he has, the athletic ability he has as well. So I feel pretty confident at the 201 here.
I mean, man, 6 running backs in our top 13, and this running back class is just phenomenal. I mean, they all got great size too. But yeah, Singleton, I think, is a freak show of an athlete. So I think the combine is going to do great things for him. And along with his receiving ability, that's what I really, really like that he did this year. 39 receptions at a guy that size. Very impressive stuff. At 202, I went with quarterback Jalen Milrow. And I just think that this is the player that has the most upside left on the board. Now, he's 6'2", 225 pounds. He's built pretty thick. And I don't have a ton of confidence in his draft capital at this point. So if he was going to be a first round pick, top 20 pick, I think he should probably go a little bit higher. But there's definitely concerns for him as a passer. His production as a passer didn't take the step that we kind of hoped. And he might be a day two pick. I think he's probably a guy that you want to sit for a year. But he at least did improve his sack rate this year. He took 44 sacks in 2023, which that was really bad. But he cut it down to 23, so we saw some improvement there. But his rushing ability is just ridiculous. After subtracting sacks, which college rules do, hate it, but it is what it is. He still rushed for 726 yards and 20 rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's kind of stuff we're seeing from like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, just when you're inside the five. Let's just run there with the quarterback. I don't think he's going to be as good as those guys. Definitely not as good as Josh Allen, but I think that he will have that impact in the red zone if he does get a starting job in the NFL. And from what I'm seeing, is that some people think he's going to be a mid to late first round pick. Some people think he's going to be a second round pick. So I'm really going to see what the NFL says about this guy. But if he is starting a full season in the NFL, I think he's easily going to be a guy who's top 3 in rushing yards as a quarterback. And if he's getting rushing touchdowns as well, as long as he's not god awful as a passer, he'd be good for fantasy when he's starting. So that's why I am taking Milrow here at this point.
Yeah, definitely the Konami code quarterback in this class. For me, it's all about draft capital. If he has a path to starting, and I have any confidence that he could win that job, this is probably a good pick here. Might even sneak into the first round of rookie mocks if he is a first rounder in the NFL draft. Might even go early first round for some. I'm worried about him keeping his job, to be honest. We've seen a lot of these, highly athletic, raw players kind of struggle, and then coaches get worried about losing their jobs, and then they turn to Joe Flacco. So it's a little concerning, but man, the upside is huge, and that is undeniable for sure. I'm going to kind of do the same thing as JP here and take a flyer on a quarterback because this is super flex. Now, I would not be surprised if this guy falls from here, and this is the highest we see him in mock drafts for us at least. But I've seen a lot of people talking about him lately. He's starting to get some buzz that we were wondering, where's the buzz on this guy all season? That player is Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss. He's 6'2", 220. He's finishing his 4th season. He transferred, though, to Ole Miss, his 3rd season at Ole Miss. He's one of 5 players with over 4,000 passing yards this season, second highest graded quarterback by PFF, 29 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. He is just shy of 2,000 career rushing yards, 14 touchdowns, so not quite Konami code level, but could definitely provide some rushing floor. We do have some concerns about the offense at Ole Miss and how that translates to the NFL, so that definitely could drop him in the draft. But I wanted to take him here just to highlight a guy that we like. And, If the NFL agrees, he might rise a little bit. If the NFL disagrees, which most people seem to think they will, probably fall a little bit, but I'll still want to take a shot on him if he's a day two guy. Like the size, like the athleticism, like the production. So I think right here in this draft today, I'm going to take Jackson Dart here at 203.
Yeah, superflex quarterbacks are the name of the game. So, you know, it's a flyer, like you said. There's definitely risk. Could definitely drop if he doesn't get the draft capital, like you said. But process wise, 100% agree, especially because I feel like at this point we are done with the players that, I think we feel like there's, do you agree, David? There's a little bit of a teardrop after 201. That's why we're kind of taking these shots at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Milrose upside, you can make a case that he belongs in that tier, but this is definitely where we're starting to take shots on players.
Speaking of players we're taking a shot on, so we have some wide receivers at the top, right? We're talking about these guys that we see this young breakout ages, great profiles, etc. Here we have a fifth year player that I'm going to be talking about, Trey Harris, wide receiver from Ole Miss. When you guys were first talking to me about this guy several months ago, and you threw out this kind of north of 5, it ended up with a 5.15 yards per route run as a fifth year senior. It's unheard of. My immediate thought, and I asked you guys, was, well, is he like Xavier Legette as a fifth year senior, where this is his only breakout year? And the answer was no, right? We've seen, I mean, nothing like this because this is kind of unparalleled, but he did have over 900 the previous 2 seasons. So, although this is his big breakout year, it's not like it came absolutely out of nowhere. And then kind of breaking down his yards per route run a little bit more, 9.28 yards per route run versus man. And with that, he's still over 4 versus zone. So, an absolute man eater. I don't think that term is usually used in this context, but I'm going to stick with it. And does work against zone as well. Looking through other players, JSN 4.01 yards per route in 2021 was the last player to eclipse that 4 yards per route run with at least 50 targets. And the other kind of high fours guy we've seen drafted, Devonta Smith in 2020, 4.39. Pretty good company to be in, except he's not even technically in their company because there's a 5 in front of his number. Those are fours in there, right? Which are unheard of. So it's that weird profile, right? That Xavier Legette type of profile, but better than the Xavier Legette type of profile, right? It's the fifth year. That's a red flag. But I feel like there's enough green flags that at the end of the day, 2.04 could be as low as we see this guy throughout our mock drafts. If he gets the type of hype that I think it should be logical for him to get, given the statistics and the college reported body size, at least that we see. We'll see if he's really 6'3", of course.
Yeah, and after hearing all that, you might be wondering, like, why isn't this guy talked about as a top 10 rookie pick? And a lot of what I've seen is that analytics people are going to absolutely love him due to the yards per route run. But I've seen some film guys, they kind of have him more in that like wide receiver 6, 7 range. I mean, we have here wide receiver 5 or 6, and it kind of seems like he might be a round 2 pick. I think Leggett is just it was more upside, perceived upside with the athletic ability that he showed. But Trey Harris still very good. He beat up on some small schools at the beginning of the year, but he still played pretty darn well against LSU and Kentucky. So I think he is a good player. I personally think he'll be in this range, but I mean, he might rise up. He's going to go to the Senior Bowl. It's either that or the East West Shrine Bowl. There's some weird big names in the East West Shrine Bowl this year, but I think he definitely could be a riser, and he's got a good size. So I think that this is a good pick right here. Now, the player that I'm taking at 205 is another running back that I've started to really like a lot, and it's somebody that the viewers of the college football playoffs have probably started to really like watching, and that's Cam Scatabo, running back out of Arizona State. And this guy, he had a really impressive year. He's 5'11", 215 pounds. He's not an early declare guy, but he had a great year, 1,711 rushing yards with 21 rushing touchdowns, phenomenal numbers on the ground. And as a receiver, probably even more impressive, 45 receptions for 605 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, against Texas, we were like, okay, he might not have played in the SEC, so let's see how he does against Texas. He played really, really good. Super impressive catch along the sideline where he boxed the guy out down the field, showed great ball skills, great hands. That was the only reason that this team was even in this game against Texas. But he has the second most tackles missed in the nation, behind only Ashton Genty. And when you see him, his contact balance is just super impressive. If Genty wasn't in this class, we'd be talking about this guy's missed tackles force like crazy. But yeah, he's just tough as nails. I really, really like this guy. I think the NFL is going to like him. I personally think he's going to go day two because of how tough and physical he is, as well as how good he is as a receiver. So I think that this guy has a chance to be a riser even more. Honestly, I've seen some people like him just as much as Singleton and Judkins lately. We'll see if I get there. I'm not quite there, but I think he could rise a little bit from here.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. And one other thing about that Texas game, he was sick. He's thrown up on the sidelines. Some people thought he was hungover. He came out and said he doesn't even drink. I'm gonna believe him. I know, it looks better if he says that, but also it's easy to debunk if he's lying there. So I'm gonna believe him. And as someone who suffered a pretty rough day or two of whatever this bug going around is, if he was anywhere near as bad a shape as I was, the fact that he was able to go out and not just play, but play well against SEC competition, the best of the SEC, just super impressive. Very excited to see how he does through the rest of this process. I think he has a chance to keep rising, but I don't see him falling out of the second in rookie drafts probably. So definitely a great pick here, JP. I'm gonna go ahead and take a guy I don't want to spend much time on because of his school. No, I'll talk about him. He's our tight end two right now. He was tight end one going into the season for most, but Warren has certainly eclipsed him in our view. That's Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan. He does have similar efficiency stats to Tyler Warren, but the Michigan offense was much, much worse than Penn State's. He did have a pretty good season last year, again with JJ McCarthy as opposed to their quarterback play this year. Little bit of a concern though, only 8 career missed tackles forced. So maybe he's not quite the same level of playmaker as some of these other tight ends we've seen come out lately. But I think his floor is a solid starter. I think his ceiling's maybe not quite tight end one or tier one tight end even, but especially in a tight end premium, someone that you'd be happy to get here in the middle of the second could be your tight end. Probably could have some flex value in a 175 as well. Probably going to test pretty well, at least in speed, maybe not the agility. I guess we'll have to see. That is something I'm very interested to see, those how he tests. So hopefully he does some drills at the combine.
Yeah, and when you hear David talking about a Michigan guy and actually talking positively, I mean, first of all, he's going to be sick for a second time in 2 weeks, but I always take that as worth a little bit more than when I hear him talking about other players. Like if he's actually, yeah, so absolutely, I agree. Everything you saw from him last year as well as this year, I think he definitely has the ability to be a solid NFL tight end in a tight end premium league. Happy to snag him in the middle of the second. At the 207, I'm going to take Dylan Sampson, running back, Tennessee. So this guy's a little bit smaller than a lot of the other guys we've been talking about. 5'11, 201 pounds. This is his third season, so we're looking at a early declare guy. 1,491 rushing yards, 22 touchdowns with 20 receptions. This yard total, this touchdown total, Tennessee records. And David wrote in here that the Tennessee offense looked bad when they played OSU in part because Sampson left early, but they wouldn't have done anything against OSU anyways because
Actually, JP wrote the first part. I just wrote the second part, but I really wanted you to read it. That's why I wrote it.
well, I'll read it. I'm Rod Burgundy. If you put it on the teleprompter, he has solid efficiency metrics. We're not talking Ashton Genty type of metrics, but a guy that we think will be a day two pick, whether it's round two or round three, and has the potential to be a 1A or 1B in the NFL. Potentially, from game one with the efficiency that he has and a very fast guy. Ran a 10.48 100-meter dash in high school. Of course, take it with a grain of salt. It's high school times. Not sure if that's with a hand timer, etc.
Are
But
seconds different in high school than college?
they are not different. But the ability to measure incredibly efficiently is rather different if you look at the difference between a hand timer and a non-hand timer. But a very fast guy.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a smaller running back, you want them to be really fast. And also, 22 rushing touchdowns as a smaller back, that shows me something about him and how tough he is. So I think that those markers are really, really good for a guy. And I know some scouts really, really like this guy a lot. And yeah, the Tennessee offense didn't look nearly the same when he was not playing. So I think that he probably is a really good player and somebody that I'm definitely interested to learn more about through the process. At 208, I took a wide receiver that I really like here, and that is Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. He's got really good size at 6'4", 215 pounds. He had a really good year this last year. He's not an early declare. He's coming out after his fourth season here. But this last year was really darn good. He had 87 receptions for 1,183 yards and 9 touchdowns. And that's also considering that he's playing alongside another pretty darn good prospect, Jalen Knoll. It looks like it's spelled Noel, just getting it out there for everybody. It's Knoll early in the process. So that's a good number, especially when you're playing alongside another solid prospect. I've seen his teammate Knoll ranked inside the top 12 receivers in some people's rankings. But PFF has Jaden Higgins with the highest receiving grade out of all players in this draft class, which I think is very impressive. He's got a career yards per route run of 2.8. I don't know what everybody else is in this class is. I've seen some smaller lists where it includes like 12 guys, and he's among the best out of this draft class in yards per route run as well. So I think with the size he has, some good production, yards per route run, and I've heard he's got really, really good hands. He's not dropped the ball much in college. I see a PFF tweet. It was before the season, but it said over the last 2 seasons, he only had 2 drops over 166 targets. I'm pretty sure this season as well, when he was peppered with targets, I believe I heard earlier today he had 2 drops as well. So he's got really good hands. So I think he honestly could be a guy who he might push Trey Harris potentially for the wide receiver 4 or 5 spot, depending if you include Hunter as a wide receiver. And based on there not being a lot of bigger receivers in this draft, a lot of X wide receivers, and with a lot of teams who always need X wide receivers, I could see him being a guy that is drafted at the end of the first, maybe. I think he might be a top 40 pick. I think he can be drafted where T. Higgins is, and they have the same last name. They're both very big players. So I don't know. Maybe I'm too high on this guy, but I've heard a
Are
lot of
you
scouts.
saying he's T. Higgins' brother? That's all I heard you say.
I mean, he's big. He's got the same last name. I think he could be drafted in the same range. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. I don't think.
Have
I
he
don't
and
think.
T. Higgins been seen in the same room together?
If he was T. Higgins' brother, I know you would like him a lot more, Justin. So maybe I need to just tell you that. But no, I really like this guy. I think he's going to be a riser throughout the process based on the PFF stuff, the yards per route run, and the size.
Yeah, I've seen him get mentioned as a sleeper by a lot of people I like to listen to. Love the size, love the numbers and the production, everything that you just mentioned. I will admit that I've not really watched him play much. Not that I'm the best scout or anything, but I do like to see what a player offers to pair it with the statistical background that I lean on a little bit. So I will be digging into him deeper, but definitely someone I'm very excited to look into further. JP and a few others put him on my radar not too long ago. Next guy I'm going to take is, you know, he's kind of a guy who could either rise a ton from here or fall a ton from here, but he had arguably the second most impressive season overall, behind Ashton Janty. It's tight end Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. Again, not Power 5. A little bit concerning, but still, he's 6'4", 230. It's his third season. He has 117 catches, 1,555 yards, 10 touchdowns. Had over 96 offensive and receiving grade from PFF. I haven't seen many 96 or above grades for anyone. Third highest yards per out run of all players, not just tight ends, wide receivers included, with at least 50 targets. This is what impressed me too. Tied for first for missed tackles forced among all players with 50 or more targets. So not just good at receiving, good with the ball in his hands. I think he's going to need to weigh in a little more than 230 to rise, but if he does and he still keeps that athleticism, I could definitely see him get drafted above Colston Loveland in both NFL and rookie drafts. Not sure he's going to catch Warren, but just a terrific season, someone that needs to be talked about. So I wanted to make sure he went in this draft. A little bit of concerns with level of competition and size, like I mentioned, but hoping for that day two draft capital, even though draft capital is not quite as important for tight ends. But someone I'm looking forward to watching through the rest of this process for sure.
Yeah, those numbers are absolutely insane. If he was playing in a Power 5 conference and put up 75-80% of those statistics, we'd probably be talking about him as tight end 1 in the class, potentially, in the conversation, right? So, if you can tell me you can take away 20 to 25% of a guy's production and he could still be in the tight end 1 conversation after you did that, like, with the tight end premium, definitely agree with that pick there. I would have considered taking him, probably would have taken him had you not. Since you did take him, I drafted Devin Neal, running back out of Kansas. So this guy, we see him 5'11", 215 pounds, good size, not an early declare, but has rushed for 1,200 yards and 16 touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. Also productive as a freshman, over 1 yards per route run each of the last 2 seasons. So not phenomenal pass catching there, but competent, right? He can catch, probably more of a screenplay guy than a wheel route type of guy, of course, when we see lower numbers like that. But love what he can do as a rusher. And at this point in the draft, my strategy in 10 and premium is running backs or tight ends typically. And since David took the tight end, I'll just go with the next running back on my board.
Yeah, it's a player that I really like. I think there are some athletic concerns potentially, um, but I think that he's a really creative runner and he's very efficient. He put the team on his back against Colorado and had one of the most impressive performances I've seen from a running back. And also, I just recently learned that he is Kansas Jayhawks rushing leader of all time, and that's including John Riggins and Gale Sayers, which I thought that was pretty darn interesting, actually. So I think he's a good player. Man, if he runs better than we expect, I think he could rise a bit, but who knows how much in such a stacked running back class. But I really like the guy. At 211, I went with a guy that is. We had a funny conversation about.
He's not real, JP. This guy's not real.
There's definitely some questionable things about his profile, just if he's actually real or not. First off, his name is Alec Aomaner. Justin, you mentioned that was a pretty weird name, and also Google has no idea how old he is at all. I mean, it says circa 2002 for when he was born. Hopefully, he knows when he was born because apparently we don't know.
Maybe you could ask him if he's at the Senior Bowl. I know, like he's an earlier declare, but they're letting them go now, right?
Yeah, I think he's going to be the senior one. I can't wait because this is somebody that a lot of people seem to really like. I've seen him as wide receiver 5 or 6 on multiple people's lists. He's got good size at 6'2", 210 pounds, and this is his third season. So, like you said, he's an early declare. Never had really eye popping numbers. He didn't play as a freshman. I don't know if he had an injury or whatever it was, but as a sophomore, he had a really good line of with at least 800 yards last year. This past season, it was only got to 600 yards. I think there were some concerns with the offense, but I mean, he had a really, really impressive performance against Colorado, where he had some big plays against Travis Hunter, where he had 294 yards on 13 receptions and 3 touchdowns, flashing just the upside that he has. But he also accounted for roughly 36% of the team's passing yards each of the last 2 seasons. And so I don't think the offense was just that great. So I think if he was in a better offense, his numbers would have been better. But the reason that there's so much upside with these guys because of the size I mentioned. I mean, he was like mossing Travis Hunter. And also in high school, he recorded a 10.7 600-meter time. So I think that this is a guy that could have a really impressive combine with that size that make people really like him. So I think he is a guy that I'm willing to take a shot on at this point of the draft, even though he is a wide receiver. And you make a good point, Justin. At this point in the draft, running backs and tight ends are pretty good bets.
Yeah, I like Io Manor here. I've seen some people have him projected a little higher than we do. Just some concerns on the overall production, probably. That being said, he was over a third of the team's passing yards each of the last 2 years. 12 of the 29 passing touchdowns were to him. So it was a rough offense at Stanford. He did what he could there. Very excited to see how he tests with this athletic background. I definitely think he could be a riser. Love the size and the speed. Last guy here in our draft definitely had several names I was considering, but I want to go with this guy. I think it provides us a little bit of an opportunity to talk about name value. I'm going to go with Ollie Gordon. 6'2", 225. So a little taller, which, as Justin alluded to earlier in the video, is a little bit concerning for a running back, but he runs very well. Sophomore season, over 1,700 yards, 21 touchdowns. Many thought he would win the Heisman for a while. Did struggle a bit last season, from what I hear, though, from people that have watched his film. His play wasn't as bad as the stats. The offensive line and offense in general took a pretty big step back. But look, I watched the DLF rookie mock earlier today, and this is January 6th. I think they released it today. He went at 110 in that draft. I've seen some other people I respect have him still ranked among the top running backs, obviously not in the JNT tier, but I love the fact that people still talk about him like this. He was a Devi name, so people know who he is. They had hope for him once. I do believe if he gets in the right situation, even if it takes an injury or something, if he pops for a game or two with the name value, I think you'll be able to sell him for quite a bit higher than you bought him for. And I mean, there's definitely a chance that he's a usable asset long term, but I just love the value insulation of the name value he brings, especially at 212. I think that's a good topic. I don't know if you guys have anything to add on value insulation based on name value, but especially at this point in the draft, I think that's something we should consider more than maybe not more than our own assessment of a player, but I think it should play a big role in it.
It's a difficult conversation because you look at a guy like Zach Evans, who you could say had a similar type of like name value from being that Devi name. So I think it really, it depends on the draft capital and other things associated with it. But that being said, you're not wrong in the theory behind it that if Zach Evans ever had done anything, he would have gotten a much more substantial bump than when somebody else does something kind of mediocre, right? Like the Tyrone Tracy season from this year, for example, had someone with Zach Evans' profile done that. We're talking about a guy who's going for a first as opposed to a guy in Tyrone Tracy who can probably get a second and a little bit more for him. So I definitely agree with the theory behind it, but it just can't be the only thing behind it, right? Like once we also have to listen to the other factors as well. I think it's like very great tiebreaker between prospects though.
Yeah, I think that if he puts together an impressive performance, it just makes people more willing to buy into that player at that point. So I think that's the biggest part of it because some people are all about the name value, and not everybody is. We might be hard to capitalize on it if you're trying to trade with us, but yeah, there's definitely people that are like, oh my god, gosh, I loved him in college, and oh, he's back to himself now. You know.
All right, so that wraps up our mock draft. I'm gonna just go through the names here. We have the first round: Ashton Genty, Tat McMillan, Shadur Sanders, Omarion Hampton, Cam Ward, Luther Burden, Travis Hunter. I love that you put athlete for that, by the way, David. Shout out to you. Caleb Johnson, Emeka Ibuka, Tyler Warden, Travion Henderson, and Quinshawn Judkins. And the second round, 201, Nick Singleton, Jalen Milrow, Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, Cam Scadabo, Colston Loveland, Dylan Sampson, Jaden Higgins, who JP says is actually just T. Higgins playing in college, kind of like the Eli Manning thing that he did at Penn State a while ago. Harold Fannin, Devin Neal, Alec, how do I even say his first name? Aomaner, who is not a real person and does not have a birthday, and Ollie Gordon at the 212. So wrapping up our draft here, I'm just going to throw it to both of our more college football experts here, David and JP. I'll start with you, David. Just give me one more guy we didn't talk about that you just want to throw their name out there.
Yeah, I kind of think he's going to be coming back, so I didn't draft him here. I know that we didn't put that caveat on anything, so I could have drafted him. Katron Allen, the running mate for Nick Singleton out of Penn State, he's had a pretty darn good playoff, so it might make him decide to leave. I think if Singleton leaves though and Allen comes back, he'll have a chance to own that backfield, which I think could really help him. But he's been excellent too. If he comes out, he could definitely be a day two guy. He could even rise as high as, the running back right behind Singleton, in my opinion. So I just wanted to make sure he got mentioned on this show.
Yeah, and I'll shout out a wide receiver here, Matthew Golden from Texas. And I think that the reason that he could rise is because he would be coming out as an early declare out of the SEC from Texas. I know Isaiah Bond, his teammate, we're not as high on him. I know some people think he's the wide receiver 5-ish in this class. I've seen him projected as, which I think is ridiculous since he doesn't have much production and it's just based off speed. But Matthew Golden has done way better than Isaiah Bond. In the college football playoffs, he's really impressing. He looks like the go-to guy there. He's got 936 yards and 9 receiving touchdowns, and that's nearly twice as much production as his teammate. So I think that he deserves to get some love, and I think could be a riser because of how young he is in this playoff run that he's started to emerge in.
But he's not the fast one, JP. So you're wrong.
We'll see.
Historically, I have 100% hit rate on being right against you when it comes to Texas wide receivers in the NFL. So
I mean, like, you hit a single and JP struck out. Like, it's not like you did much more.
I think Mitchell's yards per route run are still impressive. There.
Yeah, maybe you hit a foul ball, JP. We'll say you're still alive in that at bat.
I'm gonna say that that's some worthy slander when you look at what he's done the second half of the season.
He's done better.
So I'm
He
gonna.
definitely has.
Hey, with that kind of speed, you can score from first base, baby.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Data Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please make sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Data Construction Podcast, until next time.